Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon. Is microphone working all right? Am I just about audible? Thank you ever so much. My name's Ashley Jackson, and today with Amanda Ingram, who is the Archivist at St Hugh's and Pembroke, and Kate Alderson-Smith, who's the Fellow Librarian at Harris Manchester, we're going to look at two colleges in particular during the Second World War. We're not all going to speak, but because it's been a collaborative effort, initially I was interested in the topic, but obviously I can't do anything and wasn't able to do anything without access to the college archives, and so therefore the help that I've had from both Kate and Amanda and their own researches are very much part of this. But like I say, we're not all talking, but we're all here as a collaborative group, and I'm very, very glad that we could all get together and put some slides together, which hopefully will be of interest to you. What we're going to look at over the next hour is two colleges in particular, but I'm going to give a bit of an overview about the use of Oxford colleges during the Second World War. And I think what's important to note is the fact that there was a significant degree of pre-war planning when it came to relationships between government and university authorities in relation to the prospective takeover of real estate should war come. This wasn't just policy developed on the hoof. There was, of course, a precedent, and that was the fact that during the First World War, lots of buildings in places like Oxford were used for military and other war-related purposes, so this wasn't entirely new. And what you see in Oxford is that in 1938, for instance, the Vice-Chancellor and the University Registrar, a very important figure, devise a plan in conjunction with the government for the takeover, prospectively, of university and college buildings should war come. And what happens is about half of Oxford's colleges, remember there's only about 20 of them then anyway, are earmarked for requisition by government departments and agencies. This is the plan. And those comprising the other half are designated as reception colleges. So the idea is that if College X is taken over, College Y can step in, accommodate some of the students and the business of academic life. So a team approach across the colleges of the university. Also many other buildings which weren't college premises very much involved as well. The exam schools get taken over once again as a military hospital. The new Bodleian is used for a whole range of war-related purposes. So it's not just the colleges, but that's what we're focusing on today. So just for a very, very brief trot through some of the other colleges, you get major elements of the Ministry of Food go in St John's College. Chatham House, an important think tank that works during the war on post-war planning for key regions of the world, has an establishment in Balliol. A very important RAF maintenance command is based in Magdalen. The Civilian Repair Organisation, which using the Cowley Works, repairs hundreds and hundreds of damaged airframes for return to frontline services, for example during the Battle of Britain, its headquarters is moved into Merton. The Intelligence Corps are based in Pembroke and other colleges. The British Council, involved in sort of soft, gentle wartime propaganda, involving people like John Betjeman, is based in Oriel. When MI5 moves from prison to palace, when it leaves the Wormwood Scrubs in 1940 and goes up to Blenheim, you immediately get hundreds of largely female MI5 workers beamed into Keble. The Admiralty and the Foreign Office for secret code-breaking work and the production of the top secret stationery supporting code-breaking and things like that, and the work of Bletchley Park takes over Mansfield. Ruskin becomes a maternity hospital. And so essentially, you've got a great deal of work going on in these colleges. This is Mansfield, and it just gives a little impression of some of the uses that various rooms are put to when about 180 members of staff, Foreign Office and Admiralty staff, are moved into this building. The college moves out to Regent's Park, New College and other bits of the university. Now I'm going to fall at the first hurdle by trying to change a slide. Hurrah, great. So, St Hugh's College. St Hugh's and Manchester are among the most fascinating of wartime case studies in terms of the work that takes place there. And St Hugh's probably, in my mind so far, having not looked through all of the colleges yet, is in some ways the most extraordinary, because it becomes a very important hospital, as I hope to show over the next 20 minutes or so before looking at Manchester. So what it becomes is a major head injury hospital. It is the brainchild of the man in the middle here, Hugh Cairns, later knighted for his work in the early 50s, Sir Hugh Cairns. He's seen here with Lord Nuffield on the left, and on the right, a general called General Barnsley, who was the Deputy Director Medical Services for Southern Command. The hospital that develops in St Hugh's is very much the brainchild of this engine room entrepreneurial figure, Sir Hugh Cairns. He's an Australian, he's a former Rhodes Scholar at Balliol, he marries the then master's daughter, and in the 1930s is a rising star of neurosurgery and a very sought after specialist. So for example, when T.E. Lawrence has his motorcycle accident in 35, it is Hugh Cairns who attends him, and later on is allowed by his family to have his brain. He has a major role in the 30s of persuading Lord Nuffield to make the massive investments in Oxford medicine that take place in the 1930s. And he also, as a result of the investment, becomes the inaugural Professor of Surgery in 1937, Fellow of Balliol, and becomes head of the Department of Surgery. So he's a real mover and shaker. And this bodes very, very well for the kind of things that are going to take place when war unfortunately comes. So what happens is, before the war, obviously the direction of travel is recognised by government authorities. And what you see nationally is what's known as the Emergency Medical Service forms and creates many hospitals across the UK, for example, to deal with the expected enormous numbers of air raid casualties. The closest one to here is the Churchill. The Churchill is formed for this very purpose as an air raid casualty hospital for the people of Oxfordshire, should that moment come. What also happens is Cairns plans from 1938 to take over St Hugh's and turn this into a major hospital for head injury victims. He's very keen on things like getting motorcyclists to wear helmets. So he notices that in the first year and a half of war, about 2,500 army dispatch riders die in the blackout and because of risk taking. And so he becomes very much an important part of getting the War Office to adopt the wearing of, surprisingly, crash helmets for motorcyclists. He's also, before the war comes, already embedded with the military. He's an advisor to the Ministry of Health on head injuries, and he's already a neurosurgeon to the British Army. And when war comes, he joins the British Army as in the Royal Army Medical Corps, becomes head of their neurosurgery operations, and soon rises to the rank of brigadier. So this idea of empowering and giving rank to a civilian who is clearly going to be a major mover and shaker in terms of the investment in and operations of military medicine during the war. So a new base hospital is needed by the military for this important field of medical treatment, the treatment of head injuries. And it's really interesting why St Hugh's is chosen. The amount of thinking that goes into these things, they are not random selections. So Oxford's considered a good location because it's thought that it won't be heavily bombed. And it's close to London, which it is thought will be heavily bombed. St Hugh's is also considered ideal because of its spaciousness, its enormous garden grounds, but also by the fact that it's a new build. It's only 20 years old. The main buildings have only gone up in the period just before 1916. And crucially, it's based on corridors, not on pokey little staircases like traditional colleges. So if you're moving beds along, corridors are just what you need. Also, in construction, the use of brick and plaster rather than stone are seen as an advantage, as these are going to be surfaces that are easier to clean and sterilise for the operations of a medical institution. Another advantage is that it's close to the Radcliffe Infirmary, and there's a lot of relationship, obviously, between a place like this and the Radcliffe Infirmary, not least with the development of penicillin. And also, very important, this becomes much more important as the war develops, because of the proximity of Oxford to major RAF bases, like Benson, like Brize Norton, to which air evacuated casualties can be brought to then be ambulanced into Oxford. So there's a lot of, if you like, symmetry and sense that goes into the choice of St Hugh's. So St Hugh's becomes the Combined Services Hospital for Head Injuries, ACCA, as it was known to people at the time, and this is at the time, I'm not trying to make a crass joke, the Nutcracker Suite, a neurological unit of the first importance. Staff and students are moved out. So at the start of Michaelmas term 1939, St Hugh's' 15 tutors and 140 undergraduates are dispersed around Oxford with great disturbance to their studies, obviously. Most eventually come to lodge in the recently converted Holywell Manor. So Balliol in the late 20s has taken over what was the women's penitentiary and has just converted it in the 30s into a student accommodation complex. So that's where most St Hugh's operation during the war ends up residing, although there are also students at St Hilda's, New College, some of the Victorian houses around St Hugh's that they managed to keep within the college estate. I'm not commentating on these pictures because what they are is obvious. The picture just now is in the dining hall of St Hugh's. So taken over by uniformed personnel entirely. In February 1940, the heavily converted St Hugh's opens for business and rapidly fills with neurosurgeons, neurologists, anaesthetists, theatre sisters, ward sisters, and of course their patients. It was the only head injury centre devoted to service patients alone and run as a military hospital with a commanding officer, recalled one former doctor as a man who would do the daily rounds with matron and a retinue in full uniform, including peaked cap, swagger cane, and yellow crocheted gloves. The hospital's initial establishment of 50 beds soon rises to a normal establishment of 300 beds when a warren of enormous ward huts are developed across the capacious gardens linked by corridors, the major hutted accommodation being opened in March 41. And to give you an example of, if you like, the turnover of business, the number of new cases admitted during the calendar year 41 was 2,200. And these are people who've been shot in the head, basically, or through the attacks on British aircraft, have had head traumas through maybe shrapnel coming off of airframes and what have you. Of this total in 1941 of 2,200, 507 are RAF personnel, 186 of them flying personnel. The hospital achieves its peak bed capacity, unsurprisingly, around the time of the Normandy landings and just thereafter, when you've got a 450 bed hospital going on here, which is really, really quite staggering. A period during which, as Dr. John Potter recalled, casualties were pouring in and the staff barely had time to sleep. This again is a picture in the hall. As Amanda very kindly points out just now, you can see the beds pushed to the back. You can actually see some bedded patients at the back of the hall, which has been cleared for what is a Christmas party in 1940. And I think you can also see, those of you who can see in sufficient detail, the faces of some of the individuals there betray the treatment that they have received for their wounds. There are some faces there that have, heads there, that have clearly been through a great deal of trauma. The main operating theatre, college librarian Philippa Hesketh Williams of the Times wrote, was constructed out of part of the garden and the angle of the corridor leading from the old building to the newer Grey Allen building. Tell me later if I'm wrong on this geography, Amanda, please. What was to become the SCR cloakroom is constructed for the use of theatre staff, and the NAFI facility is built in the courtyard leading to the main entrance. The 6 major big wards are formed by the extensive series of huts that sprouted in the gardens, joined by corridors to the main entrance near to the operating theatres, with the administration of the hospital in the upper levels of the St Hugh's old buildings. The college library, being apart from the other wards, was used as a ward for those who were delirious and was known at the time as the Noisy Boys Ward, and apparently smelt continuously of peraldehyde, termed at the time the best and safest tranquilizer that was available to the staff there. And that's something I need to clarify is the library, because the library also remained open for the use of St Hugh's students and indeed patients. So this must have been in a certain part of the library, not the main library, with its heavy blackouts. What are we doing here? Well, that's what we're doing here. I decided not to show some of the more, the photographs of people being treated and following treatment, because they might be disturbing for some people. But this gives a pretty clear impression of the main business of this hospital. And I'll come on a little bit later to what this means in terms of mortality and chance of surviving these kinds of wounds. For those of you, that's a bullet going through, for those of you who can't quite see the whole image. The staff there remember the excellent morale that pervaded this hospital, and also the excellent training that it offered. It was a major pioneering training institution as well as active medical facility. As Potter said, we knew we were doing vital work as well as pioneering research at the same time. However busy they were, clinical staff were all expected to attend the evening sessions when the brains of those who had died were examined by Dorothy Russell and Peter Daniel to see what could be learnt. Potter recalls the cheerful, bantering camaraderie that persisted throughout the place. Although the officers' mess, which was located at 80 Woodstock Road, comprised mainly of neurologists, was a very, very important escape, as he put it, from the procession of horribly wounded men that we would be facing again when we got back to the wards and operating theatres the next day. This is a picture taken in the grounds of St Hugh's and shows patients. And here, this was the kind of metal frames that were used, I'm assuming, to hold bits on and things like that. And when the patients went out in town, they always wore muslin caps. So they were, when they were out and about, when they were allowed to go out and about in Oxford, they were very recognisable. And as you can imagine, sort of townspeople would be very, very kind to them. As well as a working hospital, the pioneering nature of the work taking place here means that it's a very important training establishment. So, for example, it functions as a training centre in neurology and neuropsychiatry for junior medical officers, with the special object of diffusing through the armed forces information of practical value. Cairns is also a pioneer at using things like medical artists in operating theatres. And also, very importantly, they keep extensive records. And as Amanda's told me, this is still something that's very much a subject of research today. So people looking at sports injuries and things like that today will often use the phenomenally well developed and maintained archives that this hospital left. Another fascinating aspect of St Hugh's work is it doesn't just do this here. And let me just put it this way. This hospital treats 13,000 people during the course of the war. So 13,000 battlefield wounded, downed air crew, whatever, come through this hospital during the war. That's a lot of people. But what they also do, and again, this is very much a Cairns brainchild, is they develop and run from St Hugh's a series of overseas, I always get this wrong, I was struggling to pronounce it, mobile neurosurgical units. Mobile neurosurgical unit. So what they do is they develop, if you like, in-theatre treatment hospitals that will follow battle activity, be it in Burma or Normandy or Italy or North Africa. This is one of them. It's a captured Italian bus that has been taken over as an operating theatre, with on the left the tented pre-operation accommodation for patients. And just to show you what's happening inside, that's a bit small, sorry about that, and I can't even read it here. But the bus is the operating theatre, and then these are beds in the tent outside. So these are kind of battlefield condition provision for operating before people can be evacuated. So these hospitals in the field are staffed by people who have gone out from St Hugh's, equipped with diathermy and power suction and lighted brain retractors for use, as someone put it, from Benghazi to the Rhine. Just as Cairns had been swift to stress the advantage of air evacuation of battlefield casualties, so too he had been busy in organising the mobile surgical teams which revolutionised the treatment of battlefield wounded, starting in North Africa and then following the Allied campaigns onwards from there. There are 9 of these units overall, and what you would find is that nursing staff and sometimes doctors accompanied critically ill patients from, say, North Africa or Normandy or Italy all the way back to Oxford. Patients are handled through various stages of care: regimental aid posts, casualty clearing stations, field ambulance and base hospitals, by doctors and nurses who have all been trained at St Hugh's and know each other before they are then air evacuated to Oxfordshire RAF bases and then brought over to St Hugh's. There's also, and I won't go into detail on it here, a great deal of synergy with Cairns and Florey, whose team obviously developed penicillin from 1940 for practical use in battlefield wounded. They spend 3 months out in North Africa and Italy in 1943, and they're starting to actually use on site penicillin and then also bring it back. And it's used in things like Ken starts using it in treatment of meningitis and what have you. So that kind of learning and medical development going on, whilst also being applied to the casualties that are being created by conflict. Philippa Hesketh Williams, the college librarian, she says, I had a clear memory of a doctor coming into a room to tell her of the effects of penicillin, just being tried for the first time in St Hugh's. He wandered around the librarian's room as if in a daze. It's a miracle, he kept on saying. They are dying the night before, and next morning their temperatures are down to normal. Here we have Montgomery visiting one of the units. This chap has actually got a bullet in the spine. So, another important aspect of St Hugh's' work is it runs satellite rehabilitation and convalescence hospitals. The main one in Oxford is the takeover, another acquisition of Headington Hill Hall. They also use the wonderful Lutyens build manor out at Middleton Park, and also Tusmore Park, Lord and Lady Bister's house. These become convalescence premises run by the Red Cross or run by St Hugh's. The idea being that when these individuals are off the critical list, they can be moved into these places, but be close enough to be brought back if further surgery and specialist treatment is required. And of course, what a lot of these people need, these are very, very long-term injuries. So they're going to be doing convalescing things like maybe doing woodwork classes, to try and get, eyesight and things like that back together, speech therapy. So these convalescence hospitals are part of a satellite of establishments working around, if you like, this base camp of St Hugh's. So in conclusion on St Hugh's, bullet wounds of the brain, apparently, I wouldn't know, but this is what some of the experts I've been reading the work of say. I would have thought the exact opposite, but there you go. Bullet wounds of the brain are rarely immediately fatal. Death is usually caused by infection. As a result of the work of Hugh Cairns and his staff, head injury patients had a much greater survival rate than in the previous war. The mortality from missile wounds of the brain decreases from 50% in World War I to around 5% in the Second World War. The 4 important developments in this are expert neurosurgery on the battlefield, antibacterial therapy, notably penicillin, speed of evacuation, especially by air, and the specialism of the Combined Services Hospital for Head Injuries at St Hugh's College, Oxford becoming the leading the leading neurosurgical centre in Great Britain just before, during, and for 5 or 6 years after the Second World War. After the war, eventually when this closes down, we might have time to talk a bit later about the de-requisitioning of this establishment. The hospital moves to the Churchill, and then it moves on to the military hospital at Wheatley. And the final one, and Amanda and I were, this is the most, when I looked through the pictures a few weeks ago, the one I thought was the most striking was the one that I think Amanda had thought was the most striking, and it's this one. Just have a look at that. That's trees in the background. This is Normandy. So this is operating on the front line. You can just work out the grisly forehead of the individual who is being operated on in emergency conditions. And that is by the teams trained by and sent out from St Hugh's. And hopefully this individual will soon be on an aircraft back to this city and this hospital. That's what this means. So, moving on to Kate's College, Harris Manchester, Manchester as it was at the time. And another example of a requisition totally different from St Hugh's, but again for me just showing the extraordinary level of planning, preparation and work that went in far away from any battlefield or any bombing campaign of the Second World War. So the kind of things, this is almost like the St Hugh's is what happens after the battle. This is very much what happens before the battle. Manchester's effort is all about what you need to do to get troops in contact with the enemy, hopefully in the best possible condition and with the best information you can before they actually contact the enemy. And so this is a story of the preparation of information to give soldiers, for example, hitting the D-Day beaches, the best chances of survival once they have landed. That is the story of Manchester. So Mansfield Road and its Holywell Junction, down onto Holywell Street, the corner where Harris Manchester College is, becomes one of the most requisitioned parts of Oxford. The takeover of its buildings all the way up to Mansfield College, including the School of Geography, transforming it into a veritable intelligence quarter of a city packed with war-related activity and alive with the comings and goings of military personnel, civil servants, and civilians engaged in the ministries and armed services that are moved out and based in Oxford. So Manchester is taken over by branches of the Admiralty's Naval Intelligence Division that becomes a tri-service activity for all of the services, although it's run by the Navy, devoted to the production of intelligence reports and maps for the use of air, land and sea forces attacking the enemy in locations across Europe and the rest of the world. They are known as Naval Intelligence Division 5 and Naval Intelligence Division 6, later being more commonly known under the umbrella of the Inter-Service Topographical Department. And what you find is a lot of these really important units have really unmemorable and difficult to say names. And I think that's partly deliberate. You don't want to call it the really important map-making centre of our war effort, because that might attract the wrong attention. And this is a period in which the threat of espionage, the mum's the word kind of spirit, which is very much alive, as we were listening to last night with the whole Bletchley Park phenomenon, this is part of what's going on. So these rather anodyne, forgettably named institutions often have importance far beyond their title. So what happens is essentially moving things out of London. The School of Geography is requisitioned in spring 40, and the great expansion of activities moved there from London to the requisitioned Manchester takes place the following year. Mansfield is taken over by the Admiralty and what's now GCHQ, Bletchley Park, and also has parts of its grounds where that new 1960s Marsh building is taken over by overspill hutted accommodation for Manchester. It also takes over the upper and lower decks of New College Old Library and parts of the Balliol College sports ground adjoining Jowett Walk, for those of you who know that little area. And like in so many other parts of Oxford, this is the development of a sea of hutted accommodation that is happening across the city. The activities based in Manchester and at the School of Geography also encompass extensive facilities for map and image production in the New Bodleian. So, for example, that houses the Admiralty's photographic library. And the prolific output of printed matter led to an intimate relationship with OUP. So OUP, for example, 85% of its capacity is being devoted to the institutions here and at Mansfield, printing secret documents, reports, plans, one-time pads, those kinds of things. Rooms in the Ashmolean are also taken over for draftsmen and map makers working on behalf of naval intelligence, as well as some hotels. So what is the in-services topography? What is it doing? So it's producing detailed geographical and geological information for the use of planners in British and Allied headquarters and of field commanders on the ground who execute their plans. So, for example, one of the first things they do is they basically corral geographers in both Oxford and Cambridge to produce what becomes a 58-volume long series of naval intelligence handbooks, one of the biggest geographical undertakings in history ever. So this idea is that wherever you're going to operate, you need geological, geographical, climatological information. The more information, the better chance you have of landing successfully and achieving what we would now call mission success. So it's only with the up-to-date expertise of these individuals and their researches that you can give this information into the right hands at the right time. So it's that kind of thing they're important that they are producing. So Naval Intelligence Division 6 begins life when a Marine called Colonel Bassett and a University College, Oxford, Classics Don Frederick Wells, begin working out of a disused toilet in the Admiralty at a time when it's becoming clear that Britain's intelligence awareness of areas where its forces are likely to operate is rubbish, basically. This is the context. In 1940, we don't know enough about anywhere we want to operate. To give you an example, in the Norway campaign, some of the best information you can give to your bomber pilots is the Baedeker's 1912 Scandinavia. So it's this sudden awareness which gets right to Churchill level very, very quickly of how ill prepared we are and how much our intelligence services have atrophied since the First World War, which leads to this major investment, which leads to the creation of these establishments in Oxford. By the end of the war, we're looking at 750 people being employed in this little area, more widely 6,000. It's a big, big operation. So much of the work, and the reason Bassett is chosen is because it's a tri-service command. He's a Royal Marine, so the idea is that air, land, and sea is Royal Marine territory. It's not just a single service thing. So in Bassett's words, much of the work of this unit boils down to this: how to get on a beach and get off it again. And you think about it, that's the situation. In 1940, anywhere that Britain is going to fight is, by definition, over the water, unless there's a successful invasion of the UK. And therefore, beach landings, parachute drops, knowing the soil, knowing water tables is absolutely crucial. We see this massively in D-Day. You know, the kind of operations that are conducted just to get little samples of sand so that you can try and work out if beach X or beach Y can take the weight of an armoured fighting vehicle. Those kinds of things are absolutely crucial. This isn't just nice to have extra bits and pieces. This is just what you want in an intelligence picture as you're trying to prepare operations and then actually take them in at the sharp end. So it's critical to commando raids, it's critical to things like the Dieppe raid, the invasion of Madagascar, Operation Torch in North Africa in late 42, Husky in Sicily, and of course massively for D-Day in 44, and also the planned occupation of Malaya and Singapore and those kinds of places as well. It requires the work of a host of specialists in soil and sand, water tables, tides and currents, the weather, mining, engineering, and the built environment. Data was derived from a range of sources. A lot of them are open intelligence sources. Aerial photographic reconnaissance. You might be flying zero-level photo reconnaissance missions from Oxfordshire air bases to try and get coastal pictures. You can then, back at Manchester, you can then staple them all together essentially to produce big panoramas. You can build models of areas you're going to attack to give elevations and all of those kinds of very important informations. You're also gaining intelligence from French resistance fighters, from SOE, from submarine patrols launching little inflatable boats onto occupied territory, beaches and what have you, or penetrating up rivers. There's also, and Kate will talk a bit more about it later, there's a massive appeal to the public via the BBC to get people's holiday snaps in and other photographs, and we'll come back to that a bit later. It becomes an absolutely crucial aspect of building this 10 million item strong library of material that can be used for operational gain. So a couple of examples. The geological section in this building is comprising soil chemists, mining engineers, economic geologists, and petroleum geologists. One of my favourite is what becomes known as the fire susceptibility section. Now this produces hundreds of brightly coloured and information-laden maps covering every city and town in every country in the world where the Allies might operate. And what they're doing is they're working out which parts of the cities or the ports are most susceptible to fire bombs, where targets might exist for blockbuster bombs that could be used to best effect, and the fire vulnerability of buildings and infrastructure in the ports and towns that the Allies are going to go through as they hopefully push towards Hitler's bunker. So this, for example, shows you that in Le Havre, these areas are special fire risks, medium fire risks. So basically the commander will know, if you take this place and we'll start offloading into it loads of supplies, don't put your ammunition in those buildings down there. Because if the German bombers come over, those are going to go up like tinder. So again, really, really specialist stuff. You've got people from the National Fire Service, you've got engineers, in particular Royal Engineers, building up in this section to provide this incredible level of detail that is going to be of huge use to people either wanting to attack places like this or more likely to take them over as Allied operations extend after D-Day and after other operations around the world. So to end on a couple of examples, specific ones of what's being done here. It provides the intelligence for the Dam Busters raid. And it's fascinating. So what the people do in this building, we're familiar with all the pictures on the film of people just dropping stuff in Scottish locks and working that bit out and the bounce and all the rest of it. But a lot more is needed than that. So you've got people working out the flow of feeder rivers and the maximum capacity of water before overspill is likely to take place. You've got botany experts using the state of vegetation shown on reconnaissance photographs of the dam to assess when it's at its highest. They also identify the Scottish locks which are going to be best for practice runs. The unit also provides the intelligence essential for the strikes that eventually sink the German battleship Tirpitz in the Norwegian fjord, constructing a full-scale model of the fjord it was hiding in as parts of efforts to brief and instruct the pilots who are going to carry out the mission. It identifies terrain on which gliders might attempt to safely land and onto which paratroops might be safely, inverted commas, dropped. It identifies where airfields might best be established and where fresh water can be found. And the last example comes from what's the well-known film, The Cockleshell Heroes. So what they do there, so what do you do in Cockleshell Heroes? It's a raid by canoeists, pretty much a suicidal raid, by canoeists on German ships anchored in Bordeaux. So the attack is conducted by canoeists who are going to enter the Gironde estuary, find their way to the mouth of the Garonne River, canoe up it, attach limpet mines to Axis vessels, and then hopefully get out. It entails paddling 80 miles upriver. So the task of ISTD is to provide as much detailed information as possible to help these brave souls who had volunteered to undertake a daredevil mission. So they furnish information on tide and currents. They pinpoint where safe hiding places might be as they lay up during the day to carry on the canoe during the night. To do this, more than 2,000 ground and aerial photos of the region are studied, over 600 silhouettes composed to enable the canoeists to identify their position while moving under cover of darkness, working out the heights of landmarks like local churches and natural features, and even providing information on distinct smells of the region, emanating, for example, from a brewery or a chemical factory. And so that's just an example of the level of detail that is being provided by people working in civilian clothes. You know, they try and lay off the uniforms, keep it all humdrum and drab. But that kind of thing, people often, they've got no idea what they're doing specifically for. They have no idea what missions they're aiming for. Like Bletchley, you're just siloed, you're doing your own little bit. But it's just the sheer, almost staggering amount of planning that is going on and the huge numbers of personnel being involved to try and make the operations, well, to try and give them the best chance of success. Now, I'm going to hand over to Kate. And I'll leave that on that one there, Kate.
Thank you. Not quite a double act, but just a change of face. Anyway, thank you, Ashley, for that. I'm really just going to talk about Manchester College, Harris Manchester College, and bring some things that we have from the archive here to show you. I mean, what's interesting, having listened to Ashley speak and the amazing things that were happening in college, how little we have actually in the archive. So we've got some letters, we've got the House Committee minutes, and we've got some plans, and that's it. So all of the material, all of that activity that was happening in college just went with the department when it left. So it's only later on now that we're getting more material in the archive and people coming to look at it. The college, Harris Manchester College, at that time was actually tiny. So in 1940, we had 4 students. Unlike the First World War, where we had a lot of conscientious objectors, at this particular point, we had lots of people go to join up, even though they were theology students, it was a reserved occupation, but a lot of them still joined up. But it was a tiny little place. Initially, the college was very enthusiastic about the war. It tried to offer its hall, some of the JCR and other lecture rooms for people to come, the officers to come and use as recreation spaces. But it was too far away for people to walk there, so it was never taken up. It tried to plant potatoes in the lawns, dug them up only to find rubble underneath it, so it didn't help then. As the School of Geography, and in fact, if we just go back, whoops, that's forward, back. So the School of Geography is this building here on the right. As that was being taken over by the ISTD, they started encroaching on Manchester. And in 1941, in October 1941, we received this letter, which is in the archive, which requisitions all of the college, apart from the chapel and the library and some other buildings in there. So this was a major upset to the college. I mean, college life still existed, even though we only had a tiny amount of people there, but it still existed, but was squeezed out to the edges there. Obviously, when the college was requisitioned, everything changed. We started having a sentry as you came into college, so you had to have passes, and we have letters in the archive from the principal asking for passes for students and lecturers to access the library. The telephones were installed, a telephone exchange was installed in college, Yale locks were added to all the rooms, and this sort of extraordinary activity happened as well as sort of college life. The department, the ISTD, grew, including an influx of Wrens and other female civilians to help with the work they're doing. And we have this sort of rather charming selection of letters asking, where can the ladies go to the loo? Which lavatories in college can we use as female toilets? Eventually, at the bottom, you can see they actually built a small building, like a portaloo, the wartime portaloo in the quad to accommodate females. We also have here, these are some of the more interesting things we have in the archive, and this is actually a plan of the college building as the ISTD took over. So you've got the main entrance here, and this is from Mansfield Road, and you can see the police are here. So they manage people coming in and out. But you can see from the outside, and this sort of view bit, that's the actual college building itself, how detailed the plans were. So you have here where particular tables are. So there are tables, filing cabinets, where there are map tables and so on. So it's incredibly detailed, and each of the sections or each of the rooms are separate sections. So in the top corner, section E, at the bottom, railway section, and out in the quad itself, where buildings, the huts were built from 1943, you have section B, central unit, and an overflow of section B. The principal at that particular time notes, requisitioning, like other vices, grows by what it feeds on, and the Ministry of Works commandeered both quads and the tennis courts, The lawns have been submerged under a mushroom growth of white huts with sooty outpourings. So I don't think he was very keen on it. But it really goes to show that every single part of the college was actually built on. So this is one of the quads. In the other quad, there were more huts built. And as Ashley said, on the grounds opposite and Mansfield Road. So it was like a hut city at this particular point. So what we have here, as I mentioned, we've got section B here. Each section looked after a particular country, and they were all sort of very insular, so they weren't allowed to mix between the different sections. So section B here is actually the Norwegian section, and we have here a photograph of some of those that worked in the hut. When we celebrated the D-Day landings in college in 2014, we were very fortunate to have some of the people who worked in college during the war come and give their recollections at that time. So we've got the recollections of Pam and Eleanor, and this is a photograph they brought with them. We've also got some interesting sort of ephemeral material, and this is a menu from 1945, a Norwegian with lots of Norwegian specialities, which we have there. And in fact, the King of Norway came as well, didn't he? But later on. But anyway, this is a photograph of Hut B. Eleanor, who you can see in the photograph at the top there, says this about working in the section. I worked in section B, which was one of the 2 huts on the college lawn. The other hut, section A, was so secret we were not allowed to enter, or indeed know what they were doing. Inside section B was a large table at the end of the hut where our commanding officer, Commander Clauser, Royal Navy, sat. He was surrounded by a number of telephones as well as a scrambler. The most interesting moments were when an outside unit requested information about specific places in Norway. Commander Clauser would then contact an airfield which would send up a plane to photograph the area. These photographs were then sent to section B, and a special gadget was used to read the photos. And Pam goes on to say, our jobs were primarily to do with the aerial photographs. We made what was called mosaics out of them. To align these photographs correctly, we had to aid us a small instrument which was like looking through a reading glass mounted on a stand. Looking at aerial photographs through this, and as long as they were aligned correctly, you had a very good 3D picture of the area. And we'll have a look at this later on. This next photograph, I'm going backwards here, aren't I? There we go. This next photograph is actually just a good example of what an inside of a hut looks like. Not very interesting, but you have all of the filing cabinets, the map drawers, and so on. And they are quite basic, and they had stoves to heat them, but it was definitely not luxurious accommodation. It's going to get me one time. This is the Arlash Hall. So this is our hall in college, and this was taken over. This is one of the biggest spaces we have, and you can see how much information, or how many people would have been in this particular place. We have a gallery which was also taken over. We had originally stored all our furniture here, but the Ministry of Defence just shipped it off somewhere else. We did all get it back, a bit damaged, but it did all come back. So this is the Arlash Hall, and this is where the D-Day, a lot of the D-Day planning was actually took place. In 1941, the public were asked to send phone directories and guidebooks to the inn, but this was followed by a much more successful campaign put out by the BBC for postcards, maps and holiday snaps. This was, as Ashley said, very successful. There were over 10 million items received, and we have some of the photographs of Peter Bradford, who was the official photographer in the unit. And they're really the promotional pictures we have of that. So we've got a series of photographs recording some of the sacks received. So these were publicised more widely and put in the papers, and it is extraordinary, the series. So if we go to the next one, this is another set of photographs which really shows the amount of work and the amount of information, knowledge required to actually sort the items, list them, store them. So in the photograph in the bottom right is in fact the New Bodleian, a room in the New Bodleian where the material was stored, sorted, etc. Pam, who was in that earlier photograph, mentions briefly what she did with some of the postcards. At around about early 1943, the BBC broadcast a programme requesting people to send their holiday snaps. These arrived. Let's go. Whoops. These arrived. These arrived in shoals, and our job was to check out where they were if there was no destination given. The photographs were all filed in boxes, and then personnel who were interested in certain places or areas would come in and find the destinations they were looking for. Our job was to inform on the back of the copies of the photographs as much relevant information as we could, i.e. time of day, whether it is rocky, whether it's coasts, sand dunes, big harbour with pier, etc., etc. And the final photograph is really, you can see the postcards. This is obviously a posed photograph, but you have the machine that they look through, looking at photographs and maps together, which is really what we were doing in college. And just one final bit. Obviously, we're extremely proud of what we did in college, or the work that was done in college, and the small archive we have about it. However, the letters we have show less gratitude for the war effort and more frustration at how long it took to clear up College for Normal Life. So the college wasn't de-requisitioned until the mid-1946. And there followed a fair bit of haggling about who should repair the furniture. As I say, there was lotly damaged, and make good things like the Yale locks and so on. The huts in the quad weren't removed until 1948, so that's quite a long time after. And there had been debate about whether we should keep the huts for student accommodation or not. This was denied. Obviously, the college saw the removal of the huts as a priority, as there was a fear that squatters would requisition them, as they had the huts on Balliol ground nearby. So they're obviously seen as being quite vulnerable. In the House report from November 1948, there was a report saying that the huts had finally been removed and the restoration of the quads complete, apart from reseeding the lawns. So there we go.
Thank you, Kate. I'm just going to end on that with a few comments on St Hugh's and the de-requisition, which could even top Manchester. So this is the principal of St Hugh's writing in the Chronicle of 45-46. He said there'd been uncertainty hanging over us all through the long vacation, and then at a few weeks' notice, with promises of help in the struggle which did not all come off, we're obliged to remove ourselves, our furniture and our books into a college which needed cleansing in every corner, filled with broken furniture and worn-out equipment, and the essential services in dangerous disarray. Ready in a month? The first feeling of all who looked on the spectacle was of utter incredulity. But by a feat of organisation for which the bursar deserves the greatest credit, it proved just possible to receive students not earlier than 2 p.m. on October the 13th, 1946. And so the massive clean-up effort includes the help of 100 prisoners of war. But then the garden is what takes years to recover. Because what they actually have is the huts are given to the university on a 3-year contract rather than being demolished. And so institutions like the Institute of Statistics, which had been a bit of a peripatetic institution without its own home, the Bureau of Animal Population, the Edward Gray Institute of Field Ornithology, and Maison Française all move into the extensive huts in St Hugh's. and so they don't get their college back until the principal's report of 1952-53 says the great event of the year has been the demolition of the huts in the garden, full possession of all its grounds and buildings for the first time since 1939. So a lot of post-war clearing up to do, as well as the return of students to normal degree courses, etc. That's where we use it. We've got a few minutes for questions, but don't feel obliged. But if anyone has anything that they would like to ask, please fire away. And thank you very much for listening to us. Thank you. Madam.
I haven't got a question, more a comment. You said that the patients at St Hugh's went out and you thought that the people of Oxford would be very kind to them. I imagine they would. My mother was a WAF at Magdalen, and she remembers the great embarrassment of not being allowed to pay for her cinema ticket when she was going to the cinema in Cowley Road. So if they will do that for just a while.
Thank you very much. I mean, one of the interesting things we didn't get to go over it today. Amanda had hoped that we would, and that is the stories from St Hugh's students, but also students across the university, of that real sense of, here we are, you know, reading English literature and you know, listening to the bells at night and the lovely night sky because of the blackout, but we're acutely aware of the war around us, and certainly the visibility of, for example, patients in the hospital was one of the things that often gave, as many of the St Hugh's students at the time said, pause for thought, that whilst they were doing their degrees, obviously going to go up and serve at some point, there was so close to them evidence of the reality of war. But also the way in which they would often, the students at St Hugh's would take out, for example, what they refer to as the ambulant patients, and maybe take them to the river or just take them out for meals and things like that. So there's quite an interesting element of interaction, and some of them actually get out. They manage to break out on VE Day when there's an enormous bonfire down on Corn Market and all the rest of it. But no, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. I'm interested to hear about the WAFs in Magdalen.
Thank you so much, very interesting. You make us feel really proud to be in Oxford. I was wondering about the head injury. You mentioned penicillin and training junior doctors. Were there more kind of controversial surgical techniques that they were testing on? Because I presume that it would be a great training ground for things that come down from kind of emotions or debilitation of all these brain areas that cause psychological damages.
I don't know is the honest answer to that. The things that, I mean, and I haven't got, you know, as far along with some of the research as I want to, and I think that in terms of medical things, I know this is, you know, sort of dancing around the edge of your question, but the kind of things I found have been a very interesting strand in, well, on the one hand, development of respirators for poison gas attacks. That's one of the big things done by Oxford chemists in the war. Another thing is a surprising interest in plastic surgery. And so one of the things that you have at the beginning of the war is you have people who have, like for example, Spanish surgeons who have worked in the Spanish Civil War on burns victims and things like that. Now some of them come to Oxford, and so there's some developments in terms of treatment of burns and things like that, which is coming directly out of the Spanish Civil War and the General War from 1939. With penicillin, I mean, all of the animal testing that's been done, it's in 1940 when at the Radcliffe Infirmary you get the first human test, which is an Oxford city policeman who has been injured in, we're not quite sure which way yet. A scratch to the face by a rose is one theory. He dies, but he's the first person who is actually tested. Then what happens, and you know, sort of you couldn't really make it up, is it then takes American muscle to develop it. So Florey obviously goes to America with teams, and there's several visits, and then when you get sort of massive American war and commercial, like Pfizer involvement in the production, that leads to the fact that by D-Day you've got sort of millions of shots of this stuff available. But I'm not aware of anything else yet in terms of these things which are way out of my comfort zone area. So I'm sorry I can't give you a decent answer. Other questions? Sarah, and then Madam here.
So you mentioned the work toward the dam busters rate, the intelligence collection for that. I'm just wondering if you know much about the liaison or lack of between this unit and the big one at RAF Medmenham. Because at Medmenham they were making the models of the dams that they would use to kind of educate 617 Squadron, and I'm just wondering, obviously there must have been some level of liaison and work between them, but it's so highly compartmentalised for reasons of secrecy. How did that work?
Again, I've just got traces of that so far. As I mentioned yesterday when we chatted, I'm very interested to know what's happening up at Harberton House, because there you've got Air Ministry codes and ciphers, and I don't know anything about it other than the fact that it's there, that it's consulted by, for example, people who are in Mansfield and Manchester. With Medmenham, it's different. That's a word that I won't say. So that RAF base that you're talking about is the ISTD set up Colonel Bassett and this UNIF Classics Don, Freddie Wells. Wells goes out there on a regular basis. He is regularly going out there. And I reckon, as it is, in terms of the written record, that's all we know at the moment. But this is a very, very clear trace, is that there's clearly personal relationships, and I think it might even come down, and you'll know far more about this than I do, to that level of sort of, he takes a drive out there every week, has chats with people, and then comes back. But there certainly is liaison, but in terms of tracking and tracing, it's one of the things, as Kate was saying, like, there's some colleges have got hardly anything because their colleges are taken over. So they got the bits when we're chucked out and we eventually come back and clean up, and we go through the whole what's it called, the whole dilapidations process. There's a massive university-wide coordinated process of how much pounds, shillings and pence you're going to get back out of the government to make up for all sorts of shortfalls. And you know, at Manchester, you installed 19 Yale locks. We do all of that. So you know, so everything's indented for. The minutiae of the finances is unsurprising in some ways, but surprising in others. But so the records aren't always in the colleges, so that means TNA stuff and other things, and often the things aren't there. And certainly in terms of my research, there's going to be a sort of falling between two stools, is about using stuff in Oxford, but not necessarily going into sufficient detail with the TNA stuff, partly because of cutting corners and space. But no, I can't yet get any further on Medmenham.
Yeah, it's very basic, but during like all this year were students still sort of actually studying, and when they were applying maybe for training, medical training, or maybe intelligence, since I know it's like a place where Oxford is very advanced on, and were there any interruption in terms of regular studies where people would just go into intelligence or medicine, because that's sort of what was happening?
Thank you very much. I think so. What happens is that there's an agreement made between the government and British universities across the board that we won't shut down. That obviously you're going to have reserved occupations, and if you're in sciences and medicine, you're going to carry on doing your stuff. It's not so much going to be the case in humanities, but a very, very spirited fight is put up by, and they're not having to push too hard, by humanities academics around the country saying, look, although the war might be a focus, we've got to think about the post-war world, we've got to think about values and all sorts of things and reconstruction, so you can't just shut us down. And that's fine, the government totally gets that and has made commitments that it's not going to do that even in the emergency situation of war. What you find is that the university changed its decrees and regulations so you can do 2-year degrees. You can do parts of a degree, go and do your service and then come back. Also, when you're doing those parts of your degree, you will also be joining, say, the Officer Training Corps and scrambling around maybe on New College sports fields, scrambling over commando courses, or joining the Air Corps and what have you. So there's a lot of that goes on. It leads to the unusual thing at the end of the war is when suddenly the students are coming back, and you don't get the kind of drainage you do in the First World War, although you do in the First Year War. You get dipped by 2,000 in terms of the number of male undergraduates. Obviously, the number of female undergraduates stays the same, but eventually they're also getting national service recruited. They run a War Office selection board through the Clarendon building, and so the idea with that is that you're going to try by using an appreciation of what skills these students might have to get them into potentially useful roles. So rather than a 20-year-old male undergraduate just having to go into the infantry, that board might be able to do a bit of process and sort of switchboard connection by saying this person might be really good in this position here. So there's an intelligence to it, I think. Although you do get, certainly early in the war, there's Morris Bower, who's the master warden of Wadham. He puts massive pressure on Lindemann, who's obviously he's a big professor, but also a massive friend of Church and a member of his government. He's putting pressure, saying you should just shut the university down, just shut it down, put everything into the war. And certainly early in the war, when it's the threat of invasion is still so real, there is a concern that the country might be invaded, and a sense of what's the point in any of this anyway. But at least, when you see the students, people like Philip Larkin and Kingsley Amis, who've left pretty good records of their time here, this sense of unreality, they're just saying, here we are, we're just sort of having a few beers and enjoying the moonlight and some great reading. And then you're seeing all these guys being evacuated from Dunkirk who come through Oxford. You get sort of thousands of them come to Oxford. They get 4,500 get put down on Port Meadow as this sort of disaster is unfolding. But so it's a really quite extraordinary. I think the other thing, and I'll talk more about it in a talk tomorrow, just how it always gets me. We say, Oxford wasn't bombed. It's like, well, that doesn't mean it wasn't enduring the same things, and people still thought they were going to get bombed. When you get the Baedeker raised on places like Exeter and Canterbury, everyone, no one's got this, Hitler wants it for his capital kind of thing. They still, 1942, the Bodleian opens a 1,200 person ARP shelter. That's 1942. That's deep into the war, and so the threat of enemy action getting here from the air is something that persists, as it does across the entire country. Well, thank you all ever so much for having us and for attending. Thank you.